Good day. Today we're going to deal with a type of question where they say find D, a point in the second quadrant, such that ABCD is a parallelogram. Alright, so let's just say they say D is a point in the second quadrant, such that ABCD is a parallelogram. So it's going to be something like this. So they say ABCD is a parallelogram. So they ask you to find the coordinates of D. So we need to find the X and Y values. So if they give you D and they say D is a point in the second quadrant such that ABCD is a parallelogram, and they ask you to solve it. Before we solve it, let's just remind ourselves of the properties of a parallelogram. The properties of a parallelogram, the first thing about a parallelogram is that you know that opposite sides are parallel, so hence the name. So that is why it's called a parallelogram. And then opposite sides are equal. And then the third properties of a parallelogram, the one that we're going to use in this case, is the fact that diagonals bisect each other. So in other words, this one cuts this one into two equal parts. So it means this portion is equals to this portion. And also this one cuts the other one into two equal parts. So it means that this portion is equals to this portion. So therefore, it means that they are sharing the same midpoint. So whenever diagonals are bisecting each other, it means that they're sharing the same midpoint. So it means this midpoint works for this line and also this line as well. So this is what we're going to use. So let's solve it. So notice that this becomes a diagonal of the parallelogram. So if this is a diagonal of the parallelogram, it means that if we can find the midpoint of this diagonal, it will be the same midpoint of this diagonal. So let's begin. Let's find the midpoint. So we're just going to use the midpoint formula. So therefore, the midpoint formula is the average of the x values and the average. So let me just write this better. So the average of the x value and the average of the y values. So that's the midpoint formula. So we'll divide by 2. And then from here, it means it's going to be the first x value plus the second x value. So in other words, we're going to have 4 minus 4 divided by 2. And then we're going to have this y value plus this y value. So 8 plus negative 2 is just the same as 8 minus 2. And this is going to give us, so let's just delete this stuff. So then this is going to give us 4 minus 4 is 0 divided by 2 is still 0. And then 8 minus 2 is 6 divided by 2 will be 3. So we have found the midpoint. So that will be the midpoint. So the midpoint is 0 to 3. So 0 to 3 is the midpoint. Now the same midpoint of this diagonal will be the same midpoint of this diagonal. So let me just draw a diagonal over here. So now we've got the midpoint. So if we have the midpoint, we can use this point and the midpoint in order to find this coordinate. The only thing is the mistake that most students make is to use the midpoint formula exactly like this in order to find the outer point. Whenever you are trying to find the midpoint, you use the formula exactly like this. But whenever you are trying to find one of the outer points, you don't use the midpoint exactly like this. So before, we did not know the midpoint, hence we had to use the formula in this way. But this case, we now know the midpoint and we want to find the outer point. So the reason why we can't use this formula in this way whenever we know the midpoint is because if you substitute this and this point into this formula, you will end up getting this midpoint because this formula is in order to find strictly the midpoint. So in this case, we know the midpoint, we want to find the outer point. So we cannot use the formula exactly in this way. So we have to split the formula. So now we'll say the x value of the midpoint, which is 0, which is what we found, is equals to the x value of, let's say the x value of b, which is 2. So the x value of b plus the x value of, let's call this the x value of d, because d is what we're looking for. So the x value of d divided by 2. And then from here, we can simply cross multiply. So 0 times 2 is 0. And then 1 times this stuff is exactly the same stuff. And then when we take this to the other side of the equation, we'll have negative 2 is equals to the x value of d. So We have found the x value of d. Now let's find the y value of d. So in order to find the y value, we're going to say the y value of the midpoint is the same as the first y value plus the second y value divided by 2. So the y value of the midpoint is 3. So therefore we're going to say 3 is equals to the first y value, which is -4. So -4 plus the second y value, which is what we're looking for. So the second y value is the y value of d divided by 2. And then from here, we can simply cross multiply. So we'll say 3 times 2, which is 6. And then 1 times this stuff, which is exactly the same stuff. So there we have it. So now we just have to take this to the other side. So it's going to be 6 plus 4 is equals to the y value of d. Therefore, we're going to have 10 is equals to the y value of d. So it means the coordinate of d is -2. So the coordinates of d are -2 and 10. Yeah, so let me just write it properly. So it literally looks like a triangle. So yep, that's what we have. So it's -2 to 10. So let's check if it makes sense. So -2 to 10. So if we put -2 and 10, let's see if the position makes sense, because as a mathematician, you always have to make sense of your answers. So let's just say we have -2 and 10. So yes, it makes sense because -2 is negative, right? So it's at the negative side of the x-axis, and then 10 is positive, which is at the positive side. So the position is correct. The position makes sense. So that's how we know we're correct. As a mathematician, you always have to make sense of your answers. Just before I continue, if you want to be tutored, whether it is online or physically, whether it is the situation where you're struggling in maths, or whether it is the situation where you're good in maths but want perfection, take a screenshot or save these details. Whether you're studying Cambridge, which is the UK curriculum, or whether you're studying NSC, which is the South African curriculum, or IEB, or native courses which start from N1 to N6, or any curriculum you're doing no matter which country you're at, we offer tutorials. We've got lessons and practice sessions 5 days a week. We also give you tests once a week so that we can check your improvements. Just before we continue to the next example, if you're interested in knowing the prices of the tutorials, the video that contains the prices and the updated contact details, just in case these ones have changed, is found at the end of this video. Alright, here is another example. So let's just say they give you this graph. So they give you a triangle, and then they say D is a point in the fourth quadrant such that ABCD is a parallelogram, and then they say find the coordinates of D. So it means our parallelogram would look something like this. So we have to find the coordinates of x and y. So what you'll do is that, notice we already have a diagonal. So we have got a diagonal with known points. Now we just need to draw another diagonal, and then we know that the midpoint of the pink diagonal will be the same as the midpoint of the turquoise diagonal. So let's find the midpoint. So we know that the midpoint, so notice we are finding the midpoint, so we're going to use the formula as normal. So we're going to say midpoint is the average of the x values, so the average of the x values, and then we're going to have the average of the y values, so the average of the y values. Alright, so now let's substitute our coordinate. So we're going to have 4 minus 4, because it's 4 plus -4. So we're going to have 4 plus -2, which is the same as 4 minus 2. We're going to have this part. So this is going to give us, so the midpoint is going to be 4 minus 4 is 0, divided by 2 is still 0. And then 4 minus 2 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. Alright, this diagram is not drawn to scale. So it means the midpoint is 0 is to 1. So we found the midpoint. Let me just write it over here. So 0 is to 1 is the midpoint. So the same midpoint for this diagonal is the same midpoint of this diagonal. So therefore, we can use it to find the coordinates of D. So now this time we're finding the outer point. So we're not finding the midpoint as before. So whenever we're finding the outer point, we have to split the formula. So it's going to be the first x value plus the second x value divided by 2. So the x value of the midpoint is 0. So therefore we're going to have 0 is equals to the first x value, which is -2. So we're going to have -2. So yep, we're gonna have -2, and then we're gonna have plus the x value of d, and then that is gonna be over 2. Then from here we can simply cross multiply. So when you cross multiply, 0 times 2 is 0, and then when you multiply this stuff, we're gonna have -2 plus the x value of d. So we're gonna have the x value of d. So when we take this to the other side, we're gonna have 2 is equals to the x value of d. So the x value of d is 2. So now we need to find the y value. So we write it separated. So this is gonna be the first y value. I almost wrote x, the first y value plus the second y value divided by 2. And then the y value of the midpoint is 1. So we're gonna have 1 is equals to the first y value, which is 4. So it's gonna be 4 plus the y value of d, and then this is gonna be divided by 2. So when you cross multiply, you're gonna have 2, and here it's gonna be the same stuff. So y value of d, and then when you take that to the other side, we're gonna have 4. We're gonna have 2 minus 4. So this is gonna be -2 is equals to the y value of d, and there we have it. So therefore, the coordinates of d are 2 is to -2. All right, let's check if it makes sense. So 2 is to make -2. That makes sense. So 2 is to -2. Yep, and there we have it. So this is how to find d such that is a parallelogram. So this brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Any questions you've got or any video you want me to make, please comment below. See you in the next video.